Hey, if you're listening to this right now, it's probably for the same reason I used to stay up all night a few years ago. Your mind just keeps spinning, doesn't it? Worrying about tomorrow's work, about conversations that didn't end well, about things you should have done, but didn't. I know that feeling. And I have something I want to share with you. I used to be a chronic insomniac. Really. 3, 4 in the morning, still lying there, staring at the ceiling, with my head feeling like it had 100 browser tabs open at once. I tried everything, from sleeping pills to meditation apps, from white noise to counting sheep. Some things worked temporarily, but the root problem was still there. Until I discovered this, and it completely changed how I sleep, how I live. Turns out, our minds don't need another tool to fix them. They need to hear stories. Stories that can heal. I started exploring Buddhist wisdom, not because I suddenly became spiritual, but because I was desperate and willing to try anything. And you know what? These ancient stories, they speak to the soul in a way that no meditation guide ever could. They don't tell you what to do. They just sit with you, like a friend who understands. I want to share with you 8 stories that changed my life. Not in some guru way or anything, but like a friend who's been through this and wants to hold your hand through it. Each night, I'll tell you a story. The first night is about finding your way home to yourself. That safe feeling you're always searching for. The second night, about letting go. Not giving up what you love, but stopping the grip that's so tight, it hurts. The third night, about learning to flow. You know those days when everything just flows naturally? I'll show you how to have more of those days. And so on. Each night, a gentle lesson, a warm story, a new way of seeing life. Listen. I know the internet is full of promises about changing your life. And honestly, I'm a bit hesitant to say these things myself. But people who've listened to these stories, they message me. They say they sleep better. They say they worry less. They say they feel understood. And that's exactly what I want to create for you. Not a course, not a method, but a safe space. A place where you can breathe out and feel at peace. If this sounds right to you, hit like. And if you want to go through all 8 nights with me, then subscribe. I'll be here every night with you. Oh, and one thing, I recommend listening in order. Slowly, 1 story each night. Like giving yourself time to digest, you know? I know you might want to listen to everything in one night, I understand that feeling. But trust me, the best changes usually happen slowly, gently. Just like how these stories will touch you. Not loud, just soft and sincere. Now, find yourself a comfortable position. Maybe you're lying in bed, lights already off, ready for sleep. Maybe you're sitting in your car, on your way home after a long day. Wherever you are, take a deep breath out. Let your shoulders drop. Let everything you're carrying from today just rest for a while. I'm here with you. And I have a story to tell. About someone, probably a lot like you, who searched for happiness in many places until they realized what they were looking for had always been there, waiting for them to come home. This first story I call The Call to Come Home. Have you ever felt like you're living someone else's life? Like you're playing some role and you've forgotten who you really are underneath it all? I want to tell you about someone, and maybe when you hear this story, you'll see yourself in it. They had everything that society says is success. A stable job that friends envied. A beautiful house with carefully chosen furniture. Relationships that looked perfect on social media. Achievements filling up their resume, but their heart felt empty. Every morning they'd wake up and repeat the same cycle. Shower, coffee, commute, work, meetings, dinner, sleep, then start again. Like a machine programmed to run the same routine. But underneath it all, there was always this persistent whisper, there has to be more than this. Do you know that feeling? That sense of living someone else's life, like being everywhere, except where you actually want to be. The night everything changed, and was the night they finally stopped and really looked at the life they were living. At 3 a.m., they found themselves standing in their kitchen, staring at the life they had built but couldn't feel. The refrigerator hummed quietly. The house settled around them. Everything was exactly as it should be, except for this aching emptiness that no achievement had ever filled. That's when they remembered something their grandmother used to say, "Child, you can't find yourself in what you do. You can only find yourself in who you are." But who were they, really? Beneath all the roles, the expectations, the carefully constructed identity. And in that moment of complete stillness, something extraordinary happened. For the first time in years, they didn't try to answer that question. They just stood there and felt the breath moving in and out, felt the heartbeat, felt the pure presence of existing. that moment, they realized something amazing. There was a part of them that had always been there, watching, witnessing, completely at peace no matter how chaotic life became. You know, this is what Buddhist masters call recognizing Buddha nature. Not something distant or mystical, but the awareness that's always been there, just waiting for us to stop long enough to notice it. The next morning, still shaken by the night's realization, they found themselves in a small tea shop they had never noticed before. Behind the counter was an elderly person with the most peaceful presence they had ever encountered. Not the artificial calm of someone trying to appear spiritual, but the natural ease of someone completely at home in their own skin. "You look like someone who has forgotten the way home," the tea keeper said gently, pouring steaming water over delicate leaves. "I don't understand," they replied. "I am home. I live just down the street." The tea keeper smiled. "There are many kinds of home, dear one. There's the home where your body sleeps, and there's the home where your soul rests. Which one are you looking for?" As the tea steeped, the tea keeper shared an ancient teaching. A student once asked the Buddha, "Where is enlightenment?" The Buddha simply pointed to his own heart and said, "You are asking where the ocean is while standing waist deep in its waters." Listen, I know this might sound a bit philosophical, but try to feel it. Right now, as you're listening to me speak, someone is listening, right? Someone is aware that you're listening. Someone is awake to this experience. That's not your thoughts, because you can observe thoughts. Not your emotions, because you can feel emotions. Not your body, because you can be aware of your body. That's pure awareness. The real you that you've always been, but maybe forgot in all the dreaming and worrying. Back to our story. The tea keeper continued, "You know, most of us live as if we're looking for our glasses while wearing them. We search for peace outside, while peace is the very nature of the consciousness that's searching. But why do I feel so disconnected?" they asked. "Because you've believed you are the story in your head instead of the storyteller. You've believed you are the thoughts instead of the space where thoughts appear. You've believed you are the waves instead of the ocean. And then the tea keeper did the simplest thing in the world. They poured a cup of tea and offered it. "Drink. Feel the taste. Feel the warmth. Feel the very feeling of feeling. That's your true self right there. Simple as that." As they sipped the tea, something shifted. Not some sudden enlightenment or anything, but like coming home. like remembering something they'd always known but had forgotten. The taste of the tea, the warmth spreading through their mouth, the feeling of sitting there, completely present with this moment, not needing to be anywhere else, not needing to be anyone else, just being here. They realized they'd spent their whole life searching for this feeling. The feeling of being complete. The feeling of being enough. The feeling of being home. And it had always been here, waiting for them to stop long enough to notice. "Thank you," they whispered. The tea keeper nodded. "Don't thank me. I just reminded you of what you already had. Now, go home and remember that you carry home with you wherever you go." Now listen, you might be thinking, that sounds nice, but what about real life? Stressful work, bills to pay, complicated relationships? And that's a beautiful question. Because recognizing your true nature doesn't mean life suddenly becomes perfect. It means you remember who is living that life. When you remember, you're the vast awareness instead of the narrow thoughts. Stress can still come, but it can't drown you. When you remember, you're the sky instead of the clouds. Emotional storms can still pass through, but they can't destroy you. You still have to go to work, still have to pay bills, still have to face challenges. But now you do these things from a place of peace instead of anxiety, from a place of fullness instead of lack. Try this with me right now. Place your hand on your heart. Feel that steady rhythm that has been with you through every moment of your life. Through every search, every disappointment, every moment of wondering if you're enough. This heartbeat, this breath, this awareness that is listening to these words right now, this is what has never left home. You are not lost. You never were. You simply forgot that you are what you've been seeking. Feel how this recognition lands in your body. Notice if there's any sense of relief, of coming home to yourself. This isn't something you need to understand with your mind. It's something to feel with your whole being. Your breath knows this truth, flowing in and out without your control, without your effort, demonstrating the natural wisdom that operates through you always. Tomorrow night, we'll discover what happens when you learn the ancient art of letting go, when you realize that the very thing you think you need to control is what's preventing you from being free. But for now, then rest in this knowing that you are already home, that you always have been, that you always will be. Sweet dreams, dear soul. Welcome home. And remember, story will change everything you think about letting go. I'll tell you about someone who discovered that the tighter they held on, the more pain they created, and the practice that changed everything. It's called Ancient Zen Secret: How to Let Go of What's Destroying Your Peace. You know what's funny? After last night's story, I got messages from people saying, "I felt that, but how do I actually let go of the things that are eating me alive?" And honestly, that's exactly where I was a few years ago. I had this moment of recognition, this sense of coming home to myself, but then Monday morning came, and I was right back to gripping everything so tightly my knuckles were white. So tonight, I want to share something with you. Something that completely changed how I hold my life. And it starts with a question that might surprise you. What if everything you're trying to control is actually controlling you? I know. That sounds like one of those spiritual platitudes that doesn't help when you're lying awake at 3 a.m., worrying about your kids, your job, your relationship. But stick with me here, because I'm about to tell you about someone who discovered something that will change how you see this whole control thing. There was someone who carried invisible stones in their pockets. Not real stones, but the weight of everything they thought they needed to hold on to. Every relationship, every outcome, every version of how life should be. Maybe you know this feeling. That exhaustion that doesn't come from doing too much, but from holding too tight. This person had a beautiful house, but instead of enjoying it, they spent their days worrying about every scratch on the furniture, every stain on the carpet, every sign that time was touching their carefully curated space. They had relationships they treasured, but instead of loving freely, they found themselves constantly monitoring. Is this person still happy with me? Are they changing in ways I don't like? How can I keep them exactly as they are? They had dreams and plans, but instead of flowing with life's natural unfolding, they gripped their vision so tightly they couldn't see the beautiful possibilities life was actually offering. And through it all, they wondered why they felt so tired, why joy felt so elusive, why peace seemed always just out of reach. Maybe you recognize this pattern. This exhausting dance of trying to hold water in your hands, wondering why it always slips through your fingers. The night everything changed was the night they finally understood what they were really carrying. It started with something small. A treasured mug that slipped from their hands and shattered on the kitchen floor. But as they knelt there, gathering the pieces, something inside them shattered too. All the careful holding, all the worried protecting, all the desperate attempts to keep life exactly as they wanted it. They realized they had been living like a museum curator of their own life, spending all their energy preserving rather than experiencing, maintaining rather than enjoying. Have you ever been to one of those museums where you can't touch anything? Where there are ropes everywhere and guards watching your every move? That's how they had been living in their own life. As they swept up the broken ceramic, they started crying. Not just about the mug, but about everything. The exhaustion of trying to keep their relationship from changing. The anxiety of protecting their career from any setbacks. The constant vigilance required to keep their carefully constructed world from falling apart. They had thought all this holding was love. All this controlling was care. All this gripping. But sitting there on the kitchen floor, surrounded by pieces of their favorite mug, they realized something profound. The very thing they thought was keeping them safe was actually keeping them prisoner. You know what's wild? I used to do this same thing. I had this relationship where I was so afraid of losing the person that I tried to control every aspect of how they felt about me. What they did, who they talked to, how they spent their time. I called it love, but really it was fear wearing love's clothes. And the tighter I held on, the more they pulled away. The more I tried to control, the more out of control everything became. It was like trying to hold sand. With the tighter my fist, the faster it slipped through my fingers. Back to our story. The next morning, still shaky from their kitchen floor revelation, they found themselves in a park, watching an elderly person feeding birds. What struck them wasn't the kindness of the gesture, but the way this person held the breadcrumbs, offering them with completely open hands, never trying to force a bird to stay, never chasing after the ones that flew away. There was something so peaceful about it. So effortless. You look like someone learning to let go, the elder said, noticing their observer. I don't know how, they admitted. Every time I try to let go, I just end up gripping tighter. It's like, if I don't hold on to everything, it'll all fall apart. The elders smiled, opening their hand to show the remaining crumbs. See how I hold these? Not closed so tight that I crush them. Not so loose that they blow away. Just open enough that what wants to stay can stay, and what wants to go can go. But what if what I love goes away? Ah, the elder said softly. That's the beautiful question, isn't it? What if it does? And what if, by holding it so tightly, you're crushing the very thing you're trying to protect? They watched as a small sparrow landed in the elder's palm, took a crumb, and flew away. Then another came. and another. You see, the elder continued, these birds come to me because I don't try to cage them. If I closed my hand around them, they would struggle and fight and hurt themselves trying to escape. But when I hold them lightly, they choose to stay. This hit something deep. How many times had they driven people away by holding too tightly? How many opportunities had they missed because they were so focused on controlling one outcome that they couldn't see other possibilities? But how do you do it? How do you hold something lightly when you love it so much? The elder was quiet for a moment, watching the birds. There's an old Buddhist teaching. It says we suffer not because we love, but because we attach to our love. Love wants the beloved to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include us. Attachment wants the beloved to make us happy. Wow. Let that sink in for a moment. Love wants the beloved to be happy, even if that happiness doesn't include us. Attachment wants the beloved to make us happy. When I first heard this, it felt like a punch to the gut. Because I realized how much of what I called love, how much of my caring was actually trying to control outcomes so I could feel secure. The elder continued, when you love with open hands, you're saying, I want you to flourish, even if that flourishing takes you away from me. When you love with closed fists, you're saying, I need you to stay exactly as you are so I can feel okay. Doesn't that feel dangerous? At first, because we've been taught that love means holding on. But true love is spacious enough for change, strong enough for uncertainty, brave enough to let go. They sat in silence for a while, watching the birds come and go. Free to choose. Never forced. Always welcomed. Try it, the elder said, offering some breadcrumbs. Hold them like you're holding your life. Not crushing, not abandoning. Just lovingly present. As they held the crumbs in their open palm, a bird landed. Its tiny feet tickled their skin. For a moment, they felt this urge to close their hand, to keep this beautiful moment from ending. But they didn't. They stayed open. And the bird stayed longer than any bird had stayed with the elder. When it finally flew away, instead of sadness, they felt something unexpected. Gratitude. Joy. A sense of having participated in something beautiful without needing to own it. That's the secret, the elder whispered. When you stop trying to possess the moment you can actually experience it. Walking home that day, they started to see their whole life differently. The house that they had been so worried about maintaining, what if they could love it while knowing it wouldn't last forever? What if they could enjoy it without needing it to stay perfect? The relationships they had been monitoring so carefully, that what if love meant giving people space to grow, even if that growth led them in directions they couldn't predict? The dreams they had been gripping so tightly, what if trust meant planting seeds and tending them without demanding specific flowers? That night, they tried something revolutionary. They called their partner and said something they had never said before. I love you, and I want you to be happy, even if that happiness ever leads you away from me. There was silence on the other end. Then tears. Then words that changed everything. I've been waiting my whole life for someone to love me like that. Turns out, the thing they thought would drive their partner away actually drew them closer. Because finally, their love felt like freedom instead of a cage. Now, I want to be real with you here. This isn't about becoming passive or not caring about outcomes. This isn't about giving up on your dreams or being okay with anything that happens. Letting go doesn't mean not caring. It means caring without clinging. It means loving without possessing. It means engaging fully while holding outcomes lightly. Think about it. Your breath lets go of each exhale, but that's not giving up on breathing. It's trusting the natural rhythm. Your heart releases each beat, but that's not abandoning its purpose. It's flowing with life. You can work toward your goals while knowing that the path might unfold differently than you imagine. You can love deeply while giving your beloved freedom to grow and change. You can care about your home while knowing that nothing in this world stays the same forever. The Buddhist master Suzuki Roshi said it perfectly. Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement. That's the spirit of loving with open hands. Complete acceptance and gentle engagement, all at once. Let's try something together right now. Think of something you've been holding really tightly. Maybe it's a relationship you're afraid of losing. Maybe it's a job you're desperately trying to keep. Maybe it's a version of yourself you're struggling to maintain. Now, imagine holding it like those breadcrumbs. Not crushing it with your fear. Not abandoning it because you don't care. Just holding it with love and letting it be what it is. Feel how your body responds to this. Notice if your shoulders relax a little, if your breathing gets easier, if something in your chest opens up. You're not losing anything by holding lightly. You're actually gaining the ability to truly enjoy what you have while you have it. There's this beautiful Zen saying, "You are perfect as you are, and you could use a little improvement." That's how we can hold our whole lives. Perfect as they are right now, and open to change. Your relationships are perfect as they are, and they're also constantly evolving. Your dreams are perfect as they are, and they're also allowed to grow and shift. You are perfect as you are, and you're also becoming. The person in our story learned to live this way. They kept their job but stopped white-knuckling every project. They loved their partner but stopped monitoring every mood. They cared for their home but stopped treating it like a museum. And you know what happened? Life got easier. Not because everything went perfectly, but because they stopped fighting the natural flow of change. They started dancing with uncertainty instead of being paralyzed by it. When challenges came, they could respond instead of react. When good things happened, they could enjoy them without immediately worrying about when they would end. When losses occurred, they could grieve without being destroyed. This is what the Buddha meant by the end of suffering. Not the end of difficult experiences, but the end of adding extra pain by fighting what is. Tomorrow night, I want to share with you the next part of this journey. Because once you learn to hold life lightly, something beautiful happens. You start to flow like water. You discover how to move with life's currents instead of exhausting yourself fighting against them. I'll tell you about someone who learned the secret of effortless action, who discovered why water never gets stressed about obstacles, and how you can move through your challenges with the same graceful efficiency. But for now, practice holding your life like those breadcrumbs, with love, with presence, with open hands. Notice how much energy becomes available when you stop using it all to control things that want to flow naturally anyway. Let your hands rest open beside you as you fall asleep tonight. And remember, you don't have to hold on to love to keep it. Real love stays because it wants to, not because it has to. Sweet dreams, dear friend. Tomorrow we'll discover what it means to flow like water and why the most powerful action often comes from the gentlest touch. You know what hit me after sharing last night's story? So many of you messaged saying, "Okay, I get the letting go part, but what about when life keeps throwing obstacles at me? When everything feels like an uphill battle?" And man, do I understand that feeling. Because here's the thing about letting go. It's just the first step. Once you learn to hold life lightly, the next question becomes, how do you actually move through all the stuff life throws at you? That's what tonight is about. And I'm going to tell you something that might sound crazy at first, but stick with me. Your overthinking mind is about to meet its match. Because in the next 20 minutes, you'll discover why water never gets stressed about obstacles and how this one insight can end the war between you and your life forever. Have you ever watched water move around a stone? Really watched it? It doesn't argue with the rock. Doesn't try to convince the stone to move. Doesn't exhaust itself pushing against something immovable. Water simply finds another way. Always flowing. Always moving toward where it belongs. What if you remembered that you are more like water than you think? I want to tell you about someone who learned this the hard way. Someone who approached life like a battering ram, believing that the harder they pushed, the faster they would get where they wanted to go. When traffic was slow, they would grip the steering wheel and will the cars to move faster. When relationships got difficult, they would try to force understanding through sheer effort. When work challenges arose, they would put in longer hours, push harder, demand more of themselves. But life, it seemed, was always pushing back. Every effort met with resistance. Every plan disrupted by unexpected obstacles. Every attempt to force a solution creating more problems to solve. They lived in a constant state of friction, always fighting against what was happening, always exhausted from the battle, always wondering why everything had to be so hard. Sound familiar? God, this was me for years. I used to think that if I just pushed hard enough, life would bend to my will. If I just worked longer hours, controlled more variables, anticipated every possible problem, then surely I could force my way to happiness. I was like someone trying to swim upstream their entire life, wondering why I was always tired. Until I learned what this person in our story learned. And it changed everything. The revelation came during what should have been a relaxing weekend trip. They had planned every detail, booked the perfect cabin by a river, scheduled activities down to the hour. But the river had other plans. Spring rains had turned the gentle stream into rushing rapids, flooding the hiking trails and making their planned activities impossible. As they stood on the cabin deck, watching their perfect weekend dissolve into chaos, something inside them snapped. Not in anger, but in a moment of complete surrender. For the first time in years, they had nowhere to go. Nothing to achieve. No way to force their agenda on reality. And in that moment of giving up, they really noticed the river for the first time. You know what's beautiful about watching water? It never looks stressed. Even when it's moving fast, rushing over rocks, navigating around fallen trees, There's something so graceful about it. So effortless. They sat there watching this powerful river navigate obstacle after obstacle, and slowly began to see something that would change their entire approach to life. The water wasn't fighting the rocks. It was dancing with them. When it encountered a boulder, it didn't waste energy trying to move something unmovable. It simply flowed around, finding the natural path of least resistance. And here's what blew their mind. The water that flowed around the obstacle often moved faster than if there had been no obstacle at all. That evening, feeling something shift inside them, they met a local river guide who had been reading the water for 30 years. "You look like someone who's been fighting the current," she said with a knowing smile, settling down beside them on the riverbank. "How did you know?" "I can see it in how you hold your body. Like you're always bracing against something. Always ready for battle." The guide pointed to the river. "Watch the water. See how it encounters this boulder. It doesn't try to move the rock. Doesn't waste energy pushing against something immovable. It simply flows around, finding the natural path. But what if I need to get somewhere specific? What if going around takes too long?" The guide laughed, a sound like water over stones. "See how the water that flows around this boulder joins back together downstream. It arrives at the same destination, but without the struggle. Often faster than if it had fought the obstacle." This hit something deep. How many times had they exhausted themselves pushing against immovable situations when there might have been an easier way around? "But how do you know which way to flow?" they asked. "You feel it," the guide said simply. "Water doesn't think its way around obstacles. It feels for the path of least resistance. Not because it's lazy, but because it's intelligent. Why waste energy when you don't have to?" The guide dipped her hand in the river, letting the current move her fingers. In Zen, we call this Wu Wei. Action without forcing. Movement without struggle. It's not about being passive. It's about being responsive. Responsive? Yes. See, most people think there are only two choices: push hard or give up completely. Fight or flight. But water shows us a third way: flow. Engage fully, but without resistance. Move powerfully, but along the natural path. As they talked, the guide shared stories from years of reading rivers. How the most dangerous rapids weren't the fastest water, but the places where the current fought against itself. How the most peaceful pools were found where water learned to work with the landscape instead of against it. Life is like this river. It's always moving, always changing. You can fight it and exhaust yourself, or you can learn to read the currents and flow with them. But what about when I really need something to change? When the current is taking me somewhere I don't want to go? The guide smiled. Even then, water teaches us. Watch. She picked up a small stick and placed it in an eddy where the water swirled in a gentle circle. Sometimes the current takes you in loops. Sometimes it carries you backward before moving you forward. But water never stops moving toward the sea. Something clicked. All those times they had fought against setbacks, detours, unexpected changes, and what if those weren't obstacles to their path, but part of the path itself? The river doesn't get angry at the rocks, the guide continued. It doesn't resent the fallen trees. It simply finds a way. And in doing so, it carves canyons. It shapes the landscape. It reaches the ocean. That night, they tried something different. Instead of planning the next day hour by hour, they decided to flow with whatever came up. When they woke to rain, instead of being frustrated, they made coffee and listened to the sound on the cabin roof. When the rain stopped, they went for a walk without a destination. When they felt hungry, they ate. When they felt tired, they rested. And something magical happened. The day unfolded with an ease they had never experienced. Opportunities appeared that they never would have planned. Conversations happened that were more meaningful than any scheduled activity. They realized they had been so busy forcing their agenda that they had been missing the gifts life was actually offering. You know, I tried this when I got back to the city after learning about Wu Wei. I had this big presentation at work that I had been stressing about for weeks. Usually, I would have over-prepared, rehearsed obsessively, tried to control every variable. Instead, I prepared thoroughly but held it lightly. When the projector broke right before my presentation, instead of panicking, I just flowed with it. Made it conversational. Drew diagrams on a whiteboard. Engaged with the audience directly. It ended up being the best presentation I had ever given. Not because I controlled everything, but because I didn't try to. Back to our river friend. As they drove home from that weekend, they started seeing water everywhere. In how their favorite barista moved efficiently during the morning rush, never hurried, but never wasted motion. In how their grandmother navigated family drama, somehow managing to bring peace without taking sides. They began to understand that flowing like water wasn't about being weak or passive. It was about being intelligently responsive, about finding the most efficient path, about working with reality instead of against it. At work, instead of pushing through problems with brute force, they started looking for the natural solutions. Instead of fighting with difficult colleagues, they found ways to work around personality conflicts while still getting things done. In their relationship, instead of forcing conversations when their partner was stressed, they learned to read the emotional currents. Sometimes, that meant giving space. Sometimes it meant offering presence. Always, it meant responding to what was actually happening instead of what they thought should be happening. The ancient Chinese called this Te, the power that comes from not forcing. Like how a good surfer doesn't fight the wave, but uses its energy. Like how martial artists redirect force instead of meeting it head-on. But here's what I want you to really understand about this flowing approach. It's not about going with the flow in some passive, whatever happens, happens way. It's about becoming incredibly skillful at reading the natural patterns and working with them. A river guide isn't passive. They're constantly making micro adjustments, reading the water, responding to changing conditions. But they're not fighting the river. They're dancing with it. This is what spiritual teachers mean when they talk about effortless effort. It's not that there's no effort involved. It's that the effort is aligned with natural forces instead of fighting against them. Think about your own life right now. Where are you pushing against immovable obstacles? Where are you, exhausting yourself trying to force outcomes? Where could you find a way around instead of trying to go through? Maybe it's a difficult relationship where you keep having the same argument. What if, instead of trying to win the argument, you flowed around it? Found a completely different way to connect? Maybe it's a career challenge where you keep hitting the same wall. What if there's a path you haven't considered? A way around that leads to something even better? Maybe it's a habit you're trying to change through willpower alone. What if you worked with your psychology instead of against it? Found the natural current of motivation instead of forcing yourself upstream? Let's try something together. Think of a current challenge in your life. Something that feels like you're pushing a boulder uphill. Now imagine your water encountering this obstacle. You don't have to move the boulder. You don't have to give up on reaching your destination. You just have to find the path around. What would that look like? What options haven't you considered because you were so focused on the direct route? Feel how this shifts something in your body. Notice if your breathing gets easier when you stop trying to force your way through. Water is incredibly powerful. It carved the Grand Canyon. It shapes coastlines. It moves mountains, grain by grain. But it does it all without force, without struggle, without resistance. This is the power available to you when you learn to flow. There's a beautiful story about a Zen master who was known for accomplishing incredible things with seemingly no effort. When students asked his secret, he would say, "I find the natural way and follow it." Like water finding the sea. One student pressed him, "But master, surely you must work hard to achieve so much." The master smiled and pointed to a stream flowing past the temple. "Does the water work hard to reach the ocean?" "No," the student replied. "It just flows naturally." Exactly. When you align with the natural way, the way itself carries you. This doesn't mean you become passive. Water is constantly moving, constantly responsive, constantly adapting. But it's never fighting against its own nature. You have a natural way too. A way of being that feels effortless because it's authentic to who you are. A way of working that energizes rather than drains you. A way of loving that feels like freedom rather than obligation. The challenge is learning to recognize your natural currents and trust them. Learning to distinguish between the voice that says, "Push harder," and the wisdom that says, "Flow around." Tomorrow night, I want to share something with you that builds on this flowing wisdom. Because once you learn to move like water, you start to notice something beautiful. The spaces between movement. The power of stillness. The sacred pauses that give meaning to all action. I'll tell you about someone who discovered that between every thought, every breath, every heartbeat, there's a space where perfect peace has been waiting all along. But for now, let your whole body relax into this flowing energy. Let your breath move like a gentle stream. Let your heartbeat find its natural rhythm. Notice how your body already knows this wisdom. Your blood flows through your veins without effort. Your breath moves in and out without forcing. Your heart beats with the kind of effortless consistency that water shows us. You don't have to learn to flow. You just have to stop preventing the flow that's already there. As you drift off to sleep tonight, imagine yourself as water. Powerful but not forceful. Persistent but not rigid. Always finding a way, always moving toward where you belong. And remember, the path of least resistance isn't the path of least effectiveness. Often, it's the most powerful path of all. Sweet dreams, dear friend. Tomorrow we'll discover the profound peace that lives in the spaces between all this beautiful flowing. You know what's funny? After last night's story about flowing like water, I kept getting messages from people saying, "I love this flowing idea, but my mind never stops. Even when I try to go with the flow, my thoughts are racing a mile a minute." And I totally get that. Because here's what I discovered. Learning to flow is beautiful, but there's something even more profound waiting for you in the spaces between the flowing. Tonight, I want to share something with you that might sound impossible at first, but I promise you it's real. Between your thoughts, there is a space. Between your heartbeats, a sacred pause. Between the notes of music, silence that gives music its meaning. And in those spaces, that's where peace has been hiding all along. Most people live their entire lives in the notes, never noticing the silence that makes the music possible. But tonight, you're going to discover what lives in those sacred pauses. And it's going to change everything. I want to tell you about someone who lived their life at full volume. Constantly doing, achieving, consuming, producing, from the moment they woke up until they collapsed into bed at night. Their days were symphonies of productivity. Back-to-back meetings, endless notifications, constant stimulation. They had convinced themselves that more was always better. That silence was emptiness. That pausing meant falling behind. Sound familiar? God, this was me for the longest time. I used to pride myself on how busy I was, how many tabs I had open, how quickly I could multitask. I thought stillness was laziness and quiet was wasted time. But underneath all the noise, something was calling. A whisper so quiet they could barely hear it above the chaos of their own creation. It was the sound of their soul, asking for just one moment of stillness. One breath without agenda. One pause in the relentless march toward more. The day everything changed was the day the music stopped. It happened during what should have been their most triumphant moment. The big presentation they had prepared for months was about to begin. The room was full. Everything was perfectly orchestrated. But as they stood up to speak, the microphone went dead. The projector failed. And in the sudden silence that followed, they heard something they hadn't heard in years. Nothing. Pure, complete, beautiful nothing. And in that unexpected pause, instead of panic, they felt something extraordinary. A deep exhale they didn't know they'd been holding. a settling that felt like coming home. For 30 seconds, while the technical team scrambled to fix the equipment, they stood in perfect stillness and discovered that the pause wasn't empty at all. It was full of presence, awareness, peace. You know what hit me when I first experienced this? I realized I had been afraid of quiet moments. Because when everything got still, I could actually feel what was going on inside me. Sometimes anxiety. Sometimes just restlessness. So I had been filling every moment with activity, with noise, with distraction. Not because I loved being busy, but because I was scared of what I might find in the silence. But what this person discovered that day was that the silence wasn't scary. It was sacred. When the presentation equipment was finally fixed, they gave their talk. But something had fundamentally shifted. There was a quality of presence, of groundedness, that hadn't been there before. They spoke from stillness instead of from agitation. And people noticed. After the presentation, someone came up and said, "I don't know what was different, but that felt more real than any presentation I've heard in years." That evening, still shaken by their moment of unexpected peace, they found themselves drawn to a music store. There was a piano in the corner where an elderly musician was playing a hauntingly beautiful piece. But what captivated them wasn't the notes. It was the spaces between the notes. The way silence gave shape and meaning to the melody. When the piece ended, they approached the musician. "I've never noticed the silence before," they said. The musician smiled, his eyes twinkling with understanding. Most people don't. They think music is about the notes. But any musician will tell you, music lives in the space between the notes. Without the pauses, it's just noise. But how do you know when to pause? "You feel it," the musician replied, his hands resting gently on the keys. There's a natural rhythm, a breathing in the music itself. The pause isn't planned, it's felt. It's where the music rests and gathers itself for what comes next. The musician played a simple melody, but this time he exaggerated the pauses. And suddenly, they could hear it. The conversation between sound and silence. The way each gave meaning to the other. "It's like breathing," the musician continued. "You don't have to think about when to exhale. Your body knows. The pause happens naturally when you're not forcing the rhythm." But what if I'm afraid of the quiet? What if I don't like what I hear in the silence? The musician's expression grew gentle. "Ah, You're afraid the silence will be empty. But silence isn't the absence of something. It's the presence of everything. It's where all music is born. He played a single note and let it fade into quiet. Listen, even now, the silence is full. Full of possibility. Full of what wants to emerge next. They sat together in the music store as evening light filtered through the windows. And for the first time in years, they weren't uncomfortable with the quiet. They were curious about it. There's an old Zen saying, the musician shared. In the beginner's mind, there are many possibilities. In the expert's mind, there are few. The pause is like beginner's mind. It's where new possibilities can emerge. Walking home that night, they started noticing pauses everywhere. The gap between one breath and the next. The moment of stillness when they stopped walking at a red light. The brief quiet between one thought ending and another beginning. And they realized something profound. These pauses weren't interruptions to life. They were where life actually happened. Because in those moments of stillness, they could actually feel what was real. Not what they thought about reality, but reality itself. The aliveness in their body. The awareness that was always present. The peace that didn't depend on anything external. You know what's beautiful about this? These pauses are always available. Right now, between this word and the next, there's a space. Can you feel it? Between your last heartbeat and the next one coming, there's a moment of pure stillness. Not empty stillness, but full stillness. Aware stillness. The Buddhist teacher Jon Kabat-Zinn says, "Wherever you go, there you are." But I think it's even simpler than that. However you pause, there peace is. Our friends started practicing what they called micro pauses throughout their day. Before answering the phone, a breath. Before opening their laptop, a moment of stillness. Before speaking in conversations, a tiny space to feel what wanted to be said. And these weren't long meditation sessions. Just moments. Tiny gaps in the constant doing where being could emerge. At first, it felt awkward. Like stopping mid-sentence or hesitating when they should be efficient. But gradually, something beautiful began to happen. They started showing up differently in conversations. More present, more responsive. They began making decisions from clarity instead of reactivity. They found themselves naturally creative in ways they hadn't been for years. Because here's what happens when you give space to the pause. You start living from a different place. Instead of constantly reacting to the next thing and the next thing and the next thing, you start responding from stillness. It's like the difference between a lake that's constantly choppy from wind and a lake that's calm enough to reflect the sky perfectly. Both are the same water, but one can show you things the other can't. There's this beautiful practice from the Zen tradition called just sitting. Not sitting to achieve anything or get anywhere. Just sitting. Just being aware of being aware. When I first heard about this, I thought it sounded boring. Like, what's the point of just sitting there? But when I actually tried it, I discovered something amazing. In the space of just sitting, without agenda, without trying to fix or improve or achieve anything, I could feel the presence that I actually am underneath all the doing and thinking and planning. And that presence, it's completely at peace. Not because everything in life is peaceful, but because it's the space in which all experiences arise and pass away. Like the sky that remains unchanged, whether there are clouds or clear blue or storms. Let's try something together right now. Just for a moment, stop trying to get anywhere or understand anything or even listen to my words. Just notice the aware space that's here right now. The space that's listening. The space that's breathing. The space that's present, whether thoughts are there or not, whether emotions are there or not, whether problems are there or not. Can you feel it? This spacious awareness that's completely still, completely peaceful, completely here. This is what the mystics have been pointing to for thousands of years. Not some special state you have to achieve, but the aware presence that you already are when you're not caught up in the content of experience. Our friend in the story started living more and more from this recognition. Work became less stressful because they could find moments of stillness, even in busy meetings. Relationships improved because they could pause and respond instead of just reacting. Even difficult emotions became more manageable because they could feel the space that held the emotions. They learned that you don't have to wait for external quiet to find internal stillness. You can find the pause even in the middle of noise, even in the middle of activity, even in the middle of challenge. Because the pause isn't really about external conditions. It's about remembering the aware space that's always here, always peaceful, always available. There's a story about a Zen master who was known for his incredible calm, even in the busiest monastery. Students would ask him how he stayed so peaceful with all the activity around him. He would smile and say, "I carry my monastery with me wherever I go." Not the building, but the silence. The silence is portable. That's what our friend discovered. That the sacred pause isn't something you have to find time for. It's something you can access in any moment by remembering the stillness that's always here. Before responding to an email, a pause. Before starting the car, a moment of presence. Before eating, a breath of gratitude. Before sleeping, a settling into the aware space that needs no sleep. These tiny pauses began to change the entire quality of their days. Not because they were doing anything special, but because they were remembering to be present to what was actually happening instead of being lost in thoughts about what was happening. You know what's wild? They started sleeping better too. Because they weren't carrying all the accumulated tension of a day, lived without pauses. They were naturally releasing stress moment by moment instead of storing it up. And their creativity exploded. Because in the spaces between thoughts, new ideas could emerge. In the pauses between activities, fresh perspectives could arise. In the moments of not knowing, wisdom could show up. This is what meditation really is, by the way. Not some special practice you do on a cushion, but this remembering of the space between thoughts. The awareness that's present whether you're sitting quietly or in the middle of your busiest day. Tomorrow night, I want to share with you what happens when you start living from this space of aware presence. Because something beautiful occurs when you're no longer lost in the content of experience. You start relating to your emotions in a completely different way. I'll tell you about someone who discovered that emotions aren't storms to be weathered, but weather patterns in the vast sky of awareness. And once you know you're the sky, no weather can disturb your essential peace. But for now, as you prepare for sleep, practice resting in the pause. Not doing it perfectly, not achieving some special state, just noticing the aware stillness that's always here. Between this breath and the next, can you feel it? The spacious presence that needs nothing, lacks nothing, and is completely at peace with whatever is happening. Let your whole body settle into this recognition. You are not the thoughts that come and go. You are not the emotions that arise and pass away. You are not even the body that's lying here. You are the aware space in which all of this is happening. Vast enough to hold anything, peaceful enough to remain unmoved by everything. Rest here, dear friend. In the sacred pause where you've always been home. And remember, tomorrow night, we'll explore how this awareness transforms your relationship with every feeling that visits you. It's going to be beautiful. Sweet dreams in the silence between thoughts. Okay, so after last night's journey into the sacred pause, I woke up to the most beautiful message. Someone wrote, "I found that stillness you talked about, but then my anxiety came rushing back and I felt like I lost it." How do I stay peaceful when emotions feel so overwhelming? And honestly, that question took me right back to one of the hardest periods of my life. Because here's the thing about finding that inner stillness. It's incredible. It's real. It's always available. But then life happens. Emotions happen. And suddenly you're wondering if you imagined that peace altogether. So tonight, I want to share something with you that might sound impossible when you're in the middle of an emotional storm. Your emotions are not your enemies. They're messengers carrying gifts you've refused to receive. I know. When you're in the grip of anxiety or rage or heartbreak, that probably sounds like spiritual nonsense. But stick with me here, because I'm about to tell you about someone who transformed their greatest emotional storms into their deepest wisdom. And you're about to learn their secret. There's an ancient secret about emotions that changes everything once you know it. They are not permanent residents in your house. They are visitors. Some welcome, some difficult, all temporary, all carrying messages. What if you could learn their language? What if you could host them with wisdom instead of being controlled by them? Let me tell you about someone who learned to do exactly that. Someone who used to live at the mercy of their emotional weather. When sadness came, they would disappear into it completely, convinced it would never end. When anger arrived, they would either explode or implode, neither response bringing any resolution. When anxiety visited, they would scramble to fix, control, or escape whatever triggered it. They felt like a small boat in a stormy sea, tossed about by forces beyond their control. Never knowing what emotional wave would hit next. Always bracing for impact. Exhausted from the constant vigilance. Their friends would offer well-meaning advice. Just think positive. Don't let it get to you. You're too sensitive. But none of these suggestions worked because they were trying to fight the weather instead of learning to navigate it. I was this person for years, completely at the mercy of whatever I was feeling. Happy when things went well, devastated when they didn't. Anxious about the future, depressed about the past. Like I was riding an emotional roller coaster that never stopped. The worst part? I thought this was just who I was. A sensitive person. Someone who feels things deeply. I had resigned myself to being emotionally unstable, like it was just my personality. Until I met someone who lived through the same emotional storms but somehow remained unshaken. like a lighthouse that stands steady while waves crash against it. And I had to know their secret. The breaking point for our friend came during a particularly difficult week. They had received some disappointing news about a project they'd poured their heart into. A relationship was ending, and their anxiety had reached a level that made it hard to sleep, eat, or think clearly. As they sat in their car after another sleepless night, emotions cycling through them like a tornado, CA, grief, anger, fear, shame, despair, they felt completely overwhelmed. Like they were drowning in their own inner weather. "I can't handle this anymore," they whispered to themselves. "These feelings are too much. I'm too sensitive. I'm too broken. There's something wrong with me." But in that moment of complete surrender, something unexpected happened. Instead of fighting the emotions or judging themselves for having them, they simply sat with what was arising. Not fixing, not avoiding, just witnessing. And for the first time, they noticed something remarkable. The emotions had a natural rhythm. They rose like waves, peaked, and then naturally subsided. Like breathing. Like tides. Like weather patterns. You know what's funny? I discovered this exact same thing during my own emotional breakdown. I was sitting on my bathroom floor at 2 a.m., crying about everything and nothing, when I suddenly became fascinated by the crying itself. I noticed how the sobs came in waves, how there were natural pauses between them, how my body seemed to know exactly how to process whatever was moving through it. And I realized I wasn't broken. I was just feeling. The next day, feeling raw but somehow clearer, our friend encountered a grief counselor in a park who was sitting peacefully by a pond, feeding ducks. Despite being in a profession that dealt with intense pain daily, this person radiated a calm presence that seemed almost impossible. "How do you do it?" they asked, approaching cautiously. "How do you work with so much pain and suffering without getting overwhelmed?" The counselor smiled gently, her eyes reflecting the same peace as the pond. "Watch the sky," she said, pointing upward. "See those storm clouds? Are they permanent? Do they define the sky?" "No," they replied, looking up. "They move through and pass away." Exactly. The sky remains vast and unchanging, while weather patterns come and go. Emotions are like weather in the sky of awareness. They arise, they peak, they pass away. The sky is never damaged by the storms. But how do you not get swept away by them? By remembering that I am the sky, not the weather. I can feel the rain without becoming the rain. I can witness the storm without becoming the storm. This was revolutionary. All their life, they had been identifying completely with whatever they were feeling. When sadness came, they were a sad person. When anxiety arose, they were an anxious person. When anger visited, they were an angry person. But what if that wasn't true? What if they were something larger than any emotion that passed through them? The counselor continued, "Think about it. You've felt thousands of different emotions in your life. Happy, sad, excited, bored, angry, peaceful. If you were any of those emotions, how could you experience all the others? I never thought about it that way. You are the awareness that experiences emotions, not the emotions themselves. You are the space in which feelings arise and pass away. And that space, that awareness, is naturally peaceful, naturally stable, naturally loving." She pointed to the pond. "Watch the surface. Sometimes it's choppy, sometimes it's calm. But the water itself remains water, whether it's moving or still. You remain you whether you're feeling joy or sorrow." Over the following weeks, our friend began practicing this new way of relating to emotions. Instead of saying, "I am anxious," they would notice anxiety is here. Instead of "I am sad," they would observe sadness is visiting. This simple shift in language created enormous space between their essential self and their temporary emotional states. And something beautiful started happening. The emotions didn't become less intense, but they became less overwhelming. Because there was this sense of spacious awareness that remained calm even when feelings were stormy. Let me teach you a practice that completely changed my relationship with difficult emotions. It's called rain, and it's something you can do right now with whatever you're feeling. First, recognize what's happening. Instead of getting immediately caught up in the story about why you're feeling this way, simply notice. Anxiety is here. Sadness is present. Anger is arising. This recognition creates a small but crucial space between you and the emotion. Second, allow the emotion to be there without trying to fix it, change it, or make it go away. This doesn't mean you have to like the feeling or welcome it enthusiastically. It just means you stop adding the extra layer of resistance that says this shouldn't be happening. You can say to yourself, "It's okay that this is here right now. I don't have to fight it." Third, investigate the emotion with kind curiosity. Where do you feel it in your body? What are the physical sensations? Tightness, heat, Heaviness? Restlessness? What thoughts are accompanying the emotion? What stories is your mind telling about what this feeling means? This investigation helps you see the emotion more clearly, instead of being lost in its intensity. Finally, nurture yourself with the same kindness you would offer a good friend who was struggling. You might place your hand on your heart and say, "This is a moment of suffering. Suffering is part of life. May I be kind to myself in this moment." Or you might simply breathe deeply and remind yourself, "I am the awareness experiencing this emotion. I am bigger than any feeling that passes through me." Our friend started using this practice daily. When work stress arose, instead of immediately reaching for distractions or trying to think their way out of it, they would rain on it. Recognize, allow, investigate with kindness, nurture themselves through it. And they discovered something amazing. Most emotions, when met with this kind of spacious awareness, would naturally shift and change. Not because they were forcing them to, but because that's what emotions naturally do when they're not being resisted or fed with reactive thoughts. There's this beautiful teaching from a Tibetan master who said emotions are like clouds in the sky. If you don't grab onto them or push them away, they naturally dissolve back into the open space from which they arose. But here's what really blew their mind. As they got better at being present with difficult emotions, they also became more available for pleasant ones. Joy felt richer because they weren't trying to hold on to it. Love felt deeper because they weren't afraid of losing it. Peace felt more stable because they weren't constantly defending it. They realized they had been like someone who closed all the windows to keep out storms, but then wondered why they felt so suffocated when the weather was beautiful. Let me share something personal here. I used to have these terrible anxiety attacks. Like heart racing, can't breathe, feel like I'm dying kind of anxiety. And I would do everything I could to make them stop. Take medication, use breathing techniques, distract myself, whatever. But the breakthrough came when I stopped trying to make the anxiety go away and started getting curious about it instead. What did it actually feel like in my body? Where was the sensation located? How did it move and change? And you know what happened? When I stopped fighting the anxiety, it lost its power over me. It was still uncomfortable, but it wasn't terrifying anymore. Because I realized I was the space in which the anxiety was happening, not the anxiety itself. Our friend learned to apply this to all their emotions. When grief came after their relationship ended, instead of trying to get over it quickly, they created space to feel it fully. They grieved like the sky grieves, completely present to the rain, but never doubted by it. excitement arose about new opportunities, instead of immediately worrying about what could go wrong, they allowed themselves to feel the full joy of anticipation. When anger showed up in response to injustice, instead of either suppressing it or exploding with it, they felt its energy and let it inform wise action. They discovered that emotions weren't problems to solve. They were energy moving through their system, information about their experience, temporary visitors in the vast space of their being. There's this practice from Zen called just sitting with what is. When any emotion arises, instead of immediately doing something about it, you just sit with it. Feel it fully. Let it be exactly as it is without trying to change it. And something magical happens. The emotion reveals its message. Anxiety might be saying, pay attention to something important. Sadness might be saying, something you love is changing. Anger might be saying, a boundary has been crossed. When you listen to emotions this way, they become teachers instead of tormentors. But here's the most beautiful part of this story. As our friend learned to host their emotions with awareness and compassion, other people started feeling safer around them. Because they weren't reactive anymore. They weren't trying to manage other people's emotions or protect themselves from feeling anything difficult. They could be present with someone else's anger without getting defensive. They could witness someone else's sadness without trying to fix it. They could celebrate someone else's joy without feeling like they were missing out. This is what emotional freedom actually looks like. Not the absence of difficult feelings, but the presence of spacious awareness that can hold any feeling with grace. You know what's incredible? When you stop being afraid of your own emotions, you stop being afraid of life itself. Because emotions are just life moving through you. And when you can host that movement with awareness and love, everything becomes workable. Let's try something together right now. Take a moment to notice what emotions might be present as you listen to these words. Maybe peace from this story. Maybe restlessness. Maybe sadness or joy or any combination. Whatever is here, try greeting it like a visitor. Anxiety, I see you. Sadness, you're welcome here. Peace, thank you for visiting. Notice how this changes your relationship to what you're feeling. You're not the emotion. You're the awareness that greets it. The sky that provides space for all weather. Place your hand on your heart. Feel the steady rhythm that continues through every emotional storm. This heartbeat is like your true nature, constant, reliable, unshaken by whatever weather passes through. Your emotions are not problems to solve. They're energy moving through your system. information about your experience, temporary visitors in the vast space of your being. And here's what I want you to really understand. You don't have to be perfect at this. You don't have to become some emotionally enlightened being who never gets overwhelmed. This is about developing a new relationship with your inner weather, not controlling it. Sometimes you'll remember to be spacious awareness. Sometimes you'll get caught up in the storm. Both are perfectly human. Both are part of the path. The goal isn't to never feel difficult emotions. The goal is to remember that you are vast enough to hold any emotion, stable enough to remain present through any storm, and loving enough to meet whatever arises with compassion. Tomorrow night, I want to share with you how this emotional wisdom leads to something beautiful, the discovery of balance. Not as a fixed point you have to maintain, but as a dynamic dance between all the different energies of life. I'll tell you about someone who learned to navigate life's extremes with grace, finding the middle path that the Buddha discovered under the Bodhi tree. It's going to be a beautiful continuation of this journey. But for now, rest as the sky of awareness, vast enough to hold any weather, peaceful enough to remain unshaken by any storm. Whatever emotions are present as you drift off to sleep, let them be weather patterns moving through the endless sky that you are. Not permanent residents, just temporary visitors in the space of your being. And remember, every emotion that visits you is bringing a gift. Sometimes it's information. Sometimes it's energy for change. Sometimes it's just life saying, "Feel me fully." Sweet dreams, dear sky. Let all weather pass through you with ease. You know what hit me after sharing last night's story about emotions? I realized we need to talk about something that might be the most practical Buddhist teaching for modern life. Because here's what I kept hearing from you all. Okay, I can be the sky that holds all weather. I can flow like water. I can find those sacred pauses. But how do I actually live day to day without swinging between extremes? And man, do I understand that question. Because once you start waking up to all this wisdom, you face a new challenge. Life keeps pulling you toward extremes. All or nothing. Perfect or failure. Rush or collapse. But somewhere between those extremes lies a path that ancient masters discovered. Not lukewarm, not indifferent, but dynamically responsive. Like a tree that bends without breaking. Tonight, I want to share something with you that might save you years of unnecessary suffering. It's called the middle way, and it's not what most people think it is. Let me tell you about someone who was caught in the exhausting swing between doing too much and doing nothing. Between rigid control and complete chaos. Until they discovered the secret of the perfectly tuned string. Neither too tight nor too loose, but perfectly calibrated to create beautiful music. And this discovery changed everything about how they moved through their days. This person lived their life like a pendulum, swinging wildly between extremes. At work, they would either push themselves to exhaustion or procrastinate until panic set in. In relationships, they would either give everything until they were depleted or withdraw completely when things got difficult. With self-care, they would either follow rigid routines or abandon all structure entirely. They knew something was wrong with this pattern, but every attempt to find balance seemed to land them right back in the extremes. They would start a meditation practice with intense dedication, then quit. Begin eating healthy with strict rules, then rebel by abandoning all care for their body. It was exhausting, this constant swinging between too much and too little, between trying too hard and not trying at all. They wondered if some people were just meant to live in chaos. If balance was a myth. If they were simply too all or nothing to ever find peace. God, this was me for the longest time. I'd go from working 18-hour days to not getting out of bed for 3 days. From eating nothing but kale and quinoa to demolishing an entire pizza. From meditating 2 hours a day to not touching my cushion for months. I thought this was just my personality. That I was one of those intense people who couldn't do anything halfway. And every self-help book just made it worse because they all seemed to promote some form of extreme discipline or complete surrender. Until I learned what this person in our story learned. And it changed everything. The pattern reached a breaking point during a particularly intense period. They had taken on too many projects at work, said yes to too many social commitments, and tried to maintain a perfect exercise and diet routine all at the same time. For 2 weeks, they functioned at an unsustainable pace, sleeping 4 hours a night, skipping meals, answering emails at midnight, pushing their body and mind beyond reasonable limits. Then, predictably, called in sick to work, cancelled all social plans, ordered takeout for 3 days straight, couldn't even motivate themselves to shower. As they lay on their couch, feeling like a failure, they realized they had been living like this for years. The same pattern over and over. Intensity followed by collapse. Effort followed by giving up. All or nothing, with no sustainable middle ground. There has to be another way, they thought. How do some people seem to live with such ease? How do they maintain consistency without burnout? How do they stay engaged without getting overwhelmed? Have you ever watched someone who just seems to have it figured out? They work hard, but don't seem stressed. They care about things but don't seem attached. They're engaged with life, but not exhausted by it. I used to think these people were just lucky, or that they didn't care as much as I did. But I was wrong. They had learned something I hadn't. Their answer came from an unexpected source. While walking through a local park during their recovery period, they noticed a music teacher giving a violin lesson to a young student. The teacher was patiently adjusting the strings on the violin, and they overheard her explanation. See, if the string is too tight, it will snap under pressure. If it's too loose, it won't create any music at all. But when it's just right, not too tight, not too loose, it can create the most beautiful sounds. Something about this simple teaching stopped them in their tracks. The teacher noticed their interest and smiled. "Are you a musician?" she asked. "No," they replied, "but I think I needed to hear that lesson about the strings." The teacher's eyes twinkled with understanding. "Ah, you mean the lesson about life balance?" "Yes, we are all instruments that need proper tuning." Most people think balance means finding a static point and staying there. But real balance is dynamic, responsive, adjusting moment by moment to what the situation requires. Dynamic balance? Yes. Watch a tightrope walker. They're not perfectly still up there. They're constantly making tiny adjustments, swaying slightly left and right, responding to each moment. The balance comes from the movement, not from rigidity. She played a simple melody on the violin, and they could hear it, the way each note required just the right amount of tension, just the right amount of ease. Life is like this, the teacher continued. Sometimes you need to lean in, put in more effort. Sometimes you need to pull back, rest, restore. The key is feeling what this moment actually needs, instead of forcing the same response to every situation. But how do you know what's needed? You listen. You feel. You develop sensitivity to the subtle cues that tell you when to engage and when to rest. It's like learning to read music, but instead of reading notes, you're reading life. Over the following weeks, our friend began practicing this dynamic approach to balance. Instead of having rigid rules about how many hours to work each day, they started paying attention to their energy levels and adjusting accordingly. Some days they could work intensely for long periods. Other days, shorter bursts with more breaks served them better. Instead of forcing themselves to exercise the same amount every day, they began listening to their body. Sometimes it wanted vigorous movement, sometimes gentle stretching, sometimes complete rest. Instead of trying to maintain the same social schedule regardless of how they felt, they started honoring their natural rhythms. Sometimes they craved connection and community. Sometimes they needed solitude and quiet. And you know what? Instead of this flexibility making them lazy or inconsistent, it actually made them more effective. Because they were working with their natural rhythms instead of against them. This is what the Buddha discovered 2,500 years ago when he found the middle way. For 6 years before his enlightenment, he had practiced extreme asceticism, fasting until he was skeletal, meditating until he collapsed, torturing his body in the belief that suffering would lead to awakening. But it didn't work. He was no closer to enlightenment after 6 years of extreme discipline than when he started. The breakthrough came when he heard a music teacher instructing a student about tuning a sitar. If you tighten the strings too much, they will break. If you leave them too loose, they will produce no music. But when the tension is just right, the most beautiful music can emerge. That's when the Buddha understood. He had been tightening the strings of his spiritual practice until they were about to snap. Before that, he had lived with strings too loose, indulging in every pleasure without awareness. Neither extreme had brought him closer to truth. He realized that the path to awakening wasn't found in extremes, but in the responsive middle ground between them. I love this teaching because it's so practical. It's not asking you to be perfect or find some impossible balance point. It's inviting you to develop sensitivity to what each moment actually requires. Our friends started applying this to their relationships too. Instead of either giving everything or withdrawing completely when conflicts arose, they learned to calibrate their responses. Sometimes, their partner needed space to process emotions. Sometimes they needed connection and reassurance. Sometimes, a difficult conversation required gentle persistence. Sometimes it needed to be postponed until both people were in a better state to engage. The key was learning to read the situation instead of having one-size-fits-all responses. In their work life, instead of either saying yes to everything or becoming completely unavailable, they developed what they called responsive boundaries. They could engage fully with projects that excited them while protecting their energy for what mattered most. They learned to say yes with enthusiasm and no with kindness, both from the same place of centered awareness. But here's what I think is the most beautiful part of this teaching. The middle way isn't about moderation in the sense of doing everything halfway. It's about full engagement without attachment to outcomes. You can care deeply about something while holding your care lightly. You can work hard while remaining relaxed. You can be passionate while staying balanced. It's like being a surfer. You're completely engaged with the wave, using all your skill and attention. But you're also flowing with forces much larger than yourself. You're not trying to control the ocean, just dance with it. Let me share something that really helped me understand this. There's a Zen master named Suzuki Roshi who said, "Each of you is perfect the way you are, and you can use a little improvement." At first, this sounds contradictory. How can you be perfect and need improvement at the same time? But that's exactly the middle way. Complete acceptance of what is, and gentle engagement with what's becoming. You can love yourself completely while still growing and changing. You can be grateful for your life while still working to improve it. You can be at peace with this moment while still moving toward your dreams. Our friend learned to live this paradox beautifully. They could be completely present with whatever was happening, joy, sorrow, success, failure, while still taking wise action toward their goals. When they got sick, they could rest fully without guilt about being unproductive. When they felt inspired, they could work with focused intensity without burning themselves out. When relationships got challenging, they could engage with the difficulties without either avoiding them or becoming overwhelmed by them. They developed what I like to call responsive resilience. The ability to bend without breaking, to engage without attachment, to care without clinging. There's this beautiful practice you can try. Throughout your day, before making any decision, big or small, pause and ask yourself, what does this moment actually need? Not what you think it should need. Not what worked yesterday or what might work tomorrow. But what this specific moment, with its unique conditions and energies, is asking for. Sometimes it will ask for action. Sometimes for rest. Sometimes for engagement. Sometimes for withdrawal. Sometimes for intensity. Sometimes for ease. The more you practice this, the more you develop what the Buddhists call skillful means, the ability to respond appropriately to whatever life presents, instead of reacting from old patterns. I started doing this a few years ago, and it completely changed how I approach work. Instead of forcing myself to write when my mind was scattered, I learned to recognize when creative energy was available and when it wasn't. Instead of trying to maintain the same schedule every day, I started working with my natural rhythms. Some days I'm most creative in the morning. Other days, late at night. Some weeks I can work intensively. Other weeks, I need more space. This isn't being inconsistent or undisciplined. It's being intelligently responsive to the changing conditions of life. Our friend discovered that the middle way applies to emotional regulation too. Instead of either suppressing difficult feelings or being completely overwhelmed by them, they learn to feel emotions fully while remaining grounded in their larger awareness. They could be sad without becoming depression, angry without becoming rage, excited without becoming manic. The emotions could move through them without defining them or controlling their actions. This is what emotional maturity actually looks like. Not the absence of strong feelings, but the presence of spacious awareness that can hold any feeling without being destabilized by it. Think about your own life right now. Where are you caught in extremes? Where are you swinging between too much and too little instead of finding the responsive middle ground? Maybe in your work life, alternating between overcommitment and avoidance. Maybe in relationships, between people-pleasing and isolation. Maybe in self-care, between rigid discipline and complete abandon. The middle way invites you to experiment with a third option: dynamic responsiveness. Feeling into each situation and calibrating your response to what's actually needed instead of defaulting to familiar extremes. Let's try something together right now. Think of yourself as a beautifully tuned instrument. Not rigid, not loose, but perfectly responsive to the music life wants to play through you. Feel your body right now. Notice how it naturally finds balance. Not perfectly still, but making tiny adjustments. Breathing in, breathing out. Finding equilibrium moment by moment. This is what the middle way feels like. Not a static place you arrive at, but a dynamic dance of response. Sometimes leaning in, sometimes pulling back, always calibrated to what this moment actually needs. What area of your life is calling for this kind of balanced attention? Where have you been swinging between extremes? What would it feel like to find the middle way, not as compromise, but as wisdom? Tomorrow night, we're going to explore something beautiful that emerges when you learn to live from this place of dynamic balance. Because when you're no longer caught in extremes, when you're flowing responsively with life, your heart naturally begins to open in the most extraordinary way. I'll share with you the story of someone who discovered that love isn't something you ration or earn, but something you are when all defenses are laid down. It's going to be one of the most beautiful parts of our journey together. But for now, tune yourself to this moment. Not too tight, not too loose. Just perfectly responsive to the life that's here right now. Notice how much easier it feels to breathe when you're not forcing anything. How much more natural it feels to be yourself when you're not trying to maintain some perfect image. This is your natural state. Dynamic, responsive, balanced, not through rigidity, but through wisdom. Trust this. Let yourself be the beautifully tuned instrument you already are. Sweet dreams, dear friend. Tomorrow we'll discover what happens when a heart learns to love without limits. You know what's been on my mind since last night's conversation about the middle way? I keep thinking about this message someone sent me. They said, "I'm learning to find balance in my life, but I still struggle with loving people who hurt me. How do I protect my heart without closing it completely?" And honestly, that question took me right back to one of the most challenging periods of my own journey. Because here's what I discovered about love. What if your heart is far larger than you've been taught to believe? Not the physical heart, but the heart that loves, that cares, that opens even when it's been hurt. This heart doesn't know the word stranger, and tonight, you'll remember its boundless nature. Most of us have been taught that love is something you earn, something you have to be good enough for, something that could run out if you gave too much away. But what if that's not true? What if love isn't a resource to be rationed, but more like sunlight, infinite in its source, growing brighter when shared, never diminished by giving it away? Let me tell you about someone who discovered this the hard way. Someone who had built careful walls around their heart. Not from cruelty, but from fear. Fear of being hurt again. Fear of caring too much. Fear of having their love rejected or taken for granted. They had learned to ration their affection, to hold back until they were sure it was safe, to protect their tender heart behind layers of conditions and requirements. I'll love you if you love me back. I'll care about you if you appreciate it. I'll open my heart if you promise not to hurt it. It seemed like wisdom, this careful management of their emotional resources. But over time, they noticed something troubling. The more they protected their heart, the smaller it seemed to become. The more conditions they placed on love, the less love they seemed to have. They had created safety, but they had also created a kind of prison. A heart behind bars. And they were both the prisoner and the guard. I know this feeling so well. After my first real heartbreak, I became incredibly strategic about love. I had these elaborate tests people had to pass before I would let them close. I monitored every interaction for signs that they might hurt me. I kept scorecards of who was giving what in every relationship. I thought I was being smart, protecting myself. But what I was actually doing was slowly suffocating my own capacity to love and be loved. Until I met someone whose heart seemed to have no walls at all. And I had to understand how this was possible. The encounter happened during a particularly difficult time. Our friend was caring for someone who was demanding, ungrateful, and often unkind. Someone who took their efforts for granted and never seemed satisfied with what they offered. Day after day, they found themselves becoming more resentful, more tired, more closed off. The care they were giving felt like a drain on their resources, like pouring love into a bottomless pit. I can't keep doing this, they thought. I'm giving and getting nothing back. I'm depleting myself for someone who doesn't even appreciate it. This isn't sustainable. This isn't healthy. They began to withdraw, to give less, to protect themselves by caring less. It seemed like the wise thing to do, the self-preserving thing to do. But the withdrawal didn't bring the relief they expected. Instead of feeling more energized, they felt more empty. Instead of feeling protected, they felt disconnected from the person they were caring for, and even from themselves. That's when they realized they might be misunderstanding something fundamental about the nature of love itself. The insight came through watching a hospice worker who cared for the most difficult patients. People who were dying, frightened, often angry or demanding. Yet this caregiver radiated such peace and genuine care that even the most resistant patients seemed to soften in her presence. "How do you do it?" they asked during a quiet moment. "How do you care so much without getting depleted? How do you love people who can't love you back?" The hospice worker smiled with infinite gentleness. "I think you're confusing love with need," she said. When we love from need, needing appreciation, needing reciprocation, needing the other person to be different, then yes, it's exhausting. But when we love from fullness, when we love because love is our nature, it's like sunlight. The sun doesn't get depleted by shining. It shines because shining is what it does. This hit like a thunderbolt. All their life, they had been loving from need. Needing people to respond in certain ways. Needing appreciation for their efforts. Needing love to be returned in equal measure. But what if love could come from a different place entirely? "But how do you protect yourself?" they asked. "How do you set boundaries?" "Love and boundaries aren't opposites," the hospice worker explained. can love someone completely and still say no to behavior that isn't healthy. I can care deeply and still take care of myself. Love without boundaries isn't love, it's codependency. And boundaries without love aren't healthy, they're walls. She continued, think about the sun again. It shines on everyone equally, the saint and the sinner, the grateful and the ungrateful. But it doesn't mean the sun has no boundaries. It maintains its distance, its integrity, its own nature while still giving light freely. This conversation sparked something revolutionary in our friends' understanding. They began to see that all their life, they had been trying to love strategically, calculating who deserved their care based on how they might benefit in return. But what if love wasn't meant to be strategic? What if it was meant to be natural, like breathing or the beating of the heart? They started experimenting with what they called love without contracts. Caring for people without needing specific responses. Offering kindness without keeping score. Setting boundaries from love rather than from fear. And something beautiful began to happen. The more they loved without conditions, the more love seemed to be available. It was as if their heart was a well that grew deeper, the more water was drawn from it. Let me share something personal here. A few years ago, I had a falling out with someone I really cared about. They said some things that hurt me deeply, and I found myself wanting to cut them out of my life completely. But then I remembered this teaching about unconditional love, and I decided to try something different. I would continue to love them, not their behavior, not their choices, but the essential person beneath all the pain and confusion. I didn't try to fix the relationship. I didn't demand an apology. I just held them in my heart with love and wished for their happiness, even though we were no longer in contact. And you know what happened? That love transformed me. Not them necessarily, but me. I felt more free, more open, more connected to my own heart than I had in years. Our friend discovered this same thing. As they learned to love without conditions, they weren't becoming a doormat or losing their sense of self. They were becoming more themselves. More authentic, more powerful, more free. They could love their difficult family member while still maintaining healthy boundaries. They could care about their ex-partner's well-being while not trying to fix the relationship. They could offer kindness to strangers without needing anything in return. This is what the Buddha called metta, loving kindness. It's not a feeling you have to manufacture, but the natural radiance of an open heart. When you're not defending against life, when you're not calculating who deserves what, Love flows as naturally as water finding the sea. But let's be honest about what this doesn't mean. Loving unconditionally doesn't mean accepting harmful behavior. It doesn't mean having no preferences or boundaries. It doesn't mean being naive about human nature. It means recognizing that every person, including the ones who hurt you, is struggling in their own way. It means understanding that hurt people, and that their behavior comes from their own pain, not from your inadequacy. You can love someone and still protect yourself from their harmful patterns. You can wish for someone's happiness while not being willing to be their punching bag. You can have compassion for someone's struggles while not enabling their dysfunction. This is what the hospice worker meant about love with boundaries. It's fierce love, not weak love. Love that's strong enough to say no when necessary. Love that cares enough to not participate in someone's self-destruction. Our friend learned to practice what they called loving detachment. They could care deeply about people's well-being while not taking responsibility for their choices. They could offer support while not trying to control outcomes. When their difficult relative continued to be demanding and ungrateful, they could respond with patience and kindness while also limiting their exposure to the toxicity. When friends made choices they disagreed with, they could love them while not pretending to approve of the decisions. This kind of love requires tremendous strength. It's much easier to either close your heart completely or lose yourself in codependent caring. But the middle path of love, caring deeply while holding lightly, this is where real freedom lives. There's a beautiful practice from the Buddhist tradition called loving kindness meditation. It starts with offering love to yourself, then extends it to loved ones, neutral people, difficult people, and finally, to all beings everywhere. But it's not just a meditation technique. It's training for how to live in the world with an open heart. Let's try a simple version together right now. Place your hand on your heart and feel the warmth there. This warmth, this natural caring, exists without any effort on your part. Now, think of someone you love easily, maybe a family member, a friend, a pet. Notice how your heart naturally opens when you bring them to mind. Feel the goodwill that arises effortlessly. This opening, this warmth, this goodwill, this is your natural state when you're not defending against life. Now, try extending that same warmth to yourself. May I be happy. May I be peaceful. May I be free from suffering. Notice any resistance that arises, any voice that says you don't deserve this kindness. Gently return to the warmth. This isn't about forcing feelings you don't have. It's about recognizing the love that's already there when you're not blocking it with conditions and requirements. Our friend discovered that the more they practiced this kind of unconditional love, the more it became their default way of being in the world. Not because they were trying to be a good person, but because it felt more natural than constantly defending and calculating. They found themselves smiling at strangers for no reason, feeling genuine happiness when good things happened to people they didn't even know, offering help without thinking about what they might get in return. And here's what really surprised them. People responded to this open-hearted energy. Conversations became more genuine. Relationships deepened. Even difficult interactions seemed to go more smoothly when they approached them with unconditional positive regard. It was as if their open heart gave others permission to drop their own defenses. But the most beautiful transformation was internal. They stopped feeling like love was something they had to earn or conserve. They realized that love is what they are when they're not protecting themselves from life. There's this amazing quote from Rumi: "Your task is not to seek for love, but merely to seek and find all the barriers within yourself that you have built against it." That's exactly what our friend discovered. They didn't have to learn how to love. They had to unlearn how to block love. All those walls they had built, all those conditions they had placed on their caring, all those calculations about who deserved what, these weren't protecting their heart. They were imprisoning it. When they let down these barriers, they discovered that their heart was naturally generous, naturally kind, naturally loving. Not because they were special, but because that's what hearts do when they're not afraid. Think about this in your own life. Where are you withholding love until certain conditions are met? Where are you protecting your heart in ways that might be suffocating it? Where could you experiment with loving a little more freely? Maybe it's forgiving someone who hurt you, not for their sake, but for the freedom it brings to your own heart. Maybe it's being kinder to yourself, dropping the harsh inner critic that demands perfection before offering self-compassion. Maybe it's loving your life as it is right now, instead of waiting until everything is perfect to feel grateful and content. Our friend learned that unconditional love isn't about becoming a saint or transcending human emotions. It's about recognizing that love is the ground of being. It's what's here when fear isn't running the show. You can still feel hurt when someone treats you badly. You can still feel frustrated when people make choices you disagree with. You can still have preferences about how you want to be treated. But underneath all of these natural human responses, there can be this deeper current of love. Love for the whole messy, beautiful, tragic, magnificent experience of being human. love for yourself in all your imperfection, love for others in all their confusion, love for life in all its unpredictability. This is what the mystics have been pointing to for thousands of years. Not some special emotion you have to cultivate, but the natural radiance of consciousness when it's not contracted by fear. Tomorrow night, in our final journey together, I want to share with you how all of these teachings come together. How the recognition of your true nature, the art of letting go, the wisdom of flowing, the power of presence, emotional freedom, dynamic balance, and unconditional love all point to the same beautiful truth. You are already what you've been seeking. You are already home. But for now, let your heart rest in its natural openness. Feel the love that's here without any effort on your part. The love that doesn't need to be earned or deserved or proven. This love extends to every part of your experience. Your successes and failures. Your strengths and weaknesses. Your moments of clarity and your moments of confusion. You are loved, not because you're perfect, but because love is what you are when you're not trying to be something else. Place your hand on your heart one more time. Feel that steady rhythm that's been with you through everything. This heart has never stopped loving, even when your mind forgot how. Let yourself be held by this recognition as you drift into sleep. You are love expressing itself as a human being, temporarily forgetting its infinite nature, slowly remembering its way back home. Sweet dreams, infinite heart. Tomorrow we complete this circle and discover that the end is always a new beginning. Tonight is our final night together on this journey. And you know, there's something really special about this moment that I want to share with you. Over these 7 nights, we've walked through so many stories, so many teachings. But they've all been leading to one single recognition. After all the seeking, all the learning, all the trying to become someone different, there comes a moment of the most beautiful recognition. You were never lost. You were never broken. You were never incomplete. Tonight, you remember the way home. I want to tell you about someone who spent years searching for happiness, in achievements, in relationships, in experiences, in anything that promised to fill the empty space inside. Until one ordinary moment, sitting in the most familiar place, they realized they had been looking everywhere for what had never actually left, and this recognition changed everything about how they understood their entire life. This person had become a professional seeker. They had read every spiritual book, attended workshops, tried meditation apps, practiced yoga, explored therapy, traveled to sacred places, met with teachers and healers. Each practice brought temporary relief. Each insight offered moments of clarity. Each experience provided glimpses of what they were looking for. But nothing seemed to stick. Nothing provided the lasting peace they craved. They began to wonder if they were seeking in the wrong places, or if they were fundamentally flawed, or if peace was just not meant for people like them. Maybe I'm not spiritual enough, they thought. Maybe I haven't done enough work on myself. Maybe I need to try harder, meditate longer, be more disciplined, more committed. The irony was that the harder they sought, the more elusive peace became. The more they tried to achieve awakening, the more it seemed to slip away. They were caught in the exhausting paradox of seeking what cannot be found because it was never lost. Until one perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning, sitting with their coffee in the same kitchen they had sat in 1,000 times before, something extraordinary happened. Or rather, nothing happened, and everything changed. It wasn't a dramatic moment. No blinding light or mystical experience. They were simply sitting there, tired from another sleepless night, feeling discouraged about their spiritual progress, when they noticed something they had never noticed before. The awareness that was noticing their discouragement. The consciousness that was watching their thoughts about not being spiritual enough. The presence that had been there through every seeking, every practice, every moment of feeling lost. Who is aware of my seeking? They wondered. Who has been present through every experience I've had? Who is here right now, completely unchanged by whether I'm peaceful or anxious, successful or failing, enlightened or confused? And in that moment of turning attention away from what they were seeking and toward who was seeking, everything shifted. They realized they had been like someone with a flashlight searching in the dark for the flashlight they were holding. The very awareness they were using to seek peace was itself the peace they were seeking. The consciousness that had been present through every high and every low, every achievement and every failure, every moment of joy and every moment of suffering, this awareness was completely untouched by any of it. Completely at peace regardless of what was happening. As this recognition settled in, they began to laugh. Not from happiness, but from the beautiful absurdity of what they had been doing. They had been seeking themselves. They had been trying to find what they already were. They had been attempting to achieve what was their most basic, fundamental nature. It was like a wave seeking the ocean while being made of ocean water. Like a ray of sunlight searching for the sun. like space looking for spaciousness. I am what I've been seeking, they realized. Not my personality, not my history, not my achievements or failures, but this awareness, this consciousness, this presence that has never been absent for a single moment of my life. This wasn't a philosophical understanding. It was a felt recognition, a coming home to themselves, a remembering of what had always been true but had been overlooked in all the seeking. They thought of all the years spent trying to become worthy of peace, trying to earn enlightenment, trying to fix themselves so they could finally be happy. And they saw how unnecessary all of that had been. Not because growth and healing weren't important, but because their fundamental nature had never been broken. Their essence had never been lost. Their true self had been patiently waiting for them to stop seeking long enough to notice what was already here. You know, over these 7 nights, every story I've shared with you has been pointing to this same recognition. On the first night, when we explored the call to come home, we learned that home isn't a place we need to find, but what we already are. The aware presence has always been here, waiting for us to stop searching outside long enough to notice it. On the second night, when we learned about the art of letting go, we discovered that what we think we need to hold on to is actually holding on to us. And when we learn to hold life lightly, with open hands, we see that real love doesn't need to possess in order to exist. The third night brought us the wisdom of flowing like water, learning to move with life's natural currents instead of fighting against them. We saw that the greatest power often comes from non-forcing, from finding the natural path around obstacles. The fourth night took us into the power of sacred pauses, where we discovered that between thoughts, between heartbeats, between activities, there's an aware stillness that's always present. And in that stillness, we found the peace we had been seeking. The fifth night taught us about emotional alchemy, discovering that we are not our emotions. We are the vast sky in which all emotional weather arises and passes away. And when we remember we are the sky, no weather can disturb our essential peace. The sixth night taught us the middle path, how to move dynamically between life's extremes with grace and wisdom. We learned that balance isn't a static point, but a dynamic dance, always responsive to what this moment actually needs. And last night, we explored the heart without borders, recognizing that love isn't something we earn or ration, but something we are when all defenses are laid down. That our natural heart knows no boundaries when it's not defended by fear. And now, tonight, all of these teachings come together into one beautiful truth. You have always been what you've been seeking. You have always been home. The awareness that's listening to these words right now. The presence that's been here through every moment of your life. The love that needs no reason, and the peace that passes all understanding. This is who you really are. Not the personality you think you have. Not the roles you play. Not your achievements or failures. But this pure awareness. Vast, open, loving, and completely free. I want you to feel this right now. Don't try to understand it. Don't try to grasp it. Just recognize the awareness that's aware of being aware. Who knows that you exist? Who is conscious of these words? Who has been here through every thought that's come and gone, every emotion that's arisen and passed away, every experience of your life? It's not something you can point to or describe, but it's the most obvious, most intimate, most immediate thing there is. It's you. Not you as a person, but you as the awareness in which this person appears. And this awareness, it was never born and will never die. It never began and will never end. It simply is. Always here. Always peaceful. Always complete. This is why all the seeking, all the trying to become someone else, all the worry about not being good enough, it's all based on a fundamental misunderstanding. You don't need to become awakened. You need to recognize the awakeness you already are. You don't need to earn love. You need to remember that love is your nature. You don't need to find peace. You need to stop preventing the peace that's always present. Tomorrow, you might forget this recognition. And that's perfectly human, perfectly normal. But something in you will remember. And that something will guide you home again and again and again. Because you are the home you've been seeking. The peace you've been pursuing. The love you've been longing for. As our 8-part journey together draws to a close, or perhaps begins anew, feel yourself settling into this recognition, this remembering, this coming home to what was never actually lost. Over these nights together, you've remembered how to return to your natural state of presence, recognizing that home was never a place you needed to find, but what you are. Release what no longer serves you, discovering that open hands can receive what closed fists cannot. Flow with life's natural rhythms, learning to move like water around obstacles rather than fighting what is. Find peace in sacred pauses, remembering that stillness isn't empty, but full of aware presence. Transform emotions into wisdom, becoming the sky that holds all weather with equanimity. Walk the balanced middle path, finding dynamic responsiveness rather than static positions. Love without conditions, recognizing that your heart is naturally boundless when not defended. And now, come home to yourself, to the awareness that has been here all along, the peace that needs no circumstances, the love that asks for nothing in return. Your breath continues. Your heart beats steadily. Your awareness remains, completely unchanged by what comes and goes, completely at peace with whatever arises. Tomorrow, you might forget this recognition. And that's perfectly human, perfectly normal. But something in you will remember. And that something will guide you home again and again and again. Because you are the home you've been seeking, the peace you've been pursuing, the love you've been longing for. Rest now in this knowing. Let it hold you as you hold it. Welcome home, dear soul. You have never actually left. Welcome home. Thank you for allowing me to walk with you through these 8 beautiful nights. Thank you for opening your heart. Thank you for trusting this journey. These stories live in you now, not as memories, but as recognitions. Whenever you need to be reminded of who you really are, they'll be there. And remember, every ending is a new beginning. Every homecoming is the start of a new adventure. You'll forget and remember, lose your way and find it again, 1,000 times more. And every time will be perfect. Rest deeply, my friend. In the silence between thoughts, in the love that needs no reason, in the peace that passes all understanding. You are home.